Hey everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we are finally in the 1 week countdown until the beginning of E3, which obviously we're all very excited for, and as somebody who spends most of my time talking about Nintendo, my favorite company, we're a little more than a week away from their Direct and their Treehouse presentation stuff, which is all happening on Tuesday, June 15th. Very exciting, hoping for a lot of great stuff, and that's what I wanted to really talk about in this video, is 3 of my biggest and hardest predictions I'm making yet. Yes, making a hard prediction on something like a Nintendo Direct, especially an E3 Direct, is always a risky venture, but it's also really fun to do, and it's one of those things that the more wilder out there you get, the more great it's going to feel if it actually ends up being right. It has to be something that feels not very possible. And I think that with at least 2 out of the 3 that I'm talking about today, it might fall into that camp of something that most people think would be crazy, but I kind of feel like it's going to happen. And really, I'm just focusing on 3 games. I'm sure you could tell from the title and thumbnail for this video that there are 3 specific games that are all very mysterious and that have different varying degrees of people maybe believing in. I think that there's some level of chance that all 3 of these games could show up at E3, and I wanted to just kind of go over why I think that's the case. Before we dive any deeper into these 3 titles, I always like to remind you guys that I am always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I am hoping to cross 17,000 subscribers before the end of 2021. I upload several videos a week. I live stream around once a week. I'm covering all the good E3 stuff right now. I discuss all things Nintendo and Metroid and all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then hopefully you will consider subscribing to the channel. So like I said, 3 big games is what I want to talk about for E3 that I think have a chance at showing up at the show. And I'm going to start off with maybe the smallest tier of the 3, but make no mistake, it's a huge game and something that we're all very excited for, and that does include myself, and that is Bayonetta 3. Now, it's hard to even know what to say about Bayonetta 3 because this dumb game that we all know will be so good is just so mysterious. It was announced at the Game Awards back in December of 2017, and then it just went silent. They completely ghosted us with this game. We don't know anything about it, and the closest thing to a quote-unquote update that we've gotten was early this year when Hideki Kamiya basically said, hey, the game's being worked on, it's not ready to show until Nintendo is ready, and so fans need to just reset their expectations and they need to forget about the game. I'm paraphrasing here, but he said stuff very similar to this. Fans need to just forget about the game so that they can be excited and happy whenever it shows up again in the nebulous future. And it's like, okay, I get what you're trying to say, dude, but come on, man. This game was announced over 3 years ago, and there's been 0 updates. Since this game was announced, we had both the announcement and then release of another Platinum Games game, which was Astral Chain on the Nintendo Switch, which is a fan-freaking-tastic action game. I love that title so much, and I do hope that we get a sequel eventually. I think we almost for sure will. It did very well for itself. And it's like, you know, clearly Platinum is being active and getting stuff done, and Bayonetta is a very popular franchise and character, and it's become now essentially synonymous with Nintendo because Bayonetta 2 is an exclusive Nintendo title, and Bayonetta 3 will also be the same. And so, you know, if the game is struggling behind the scenes or whatever, I guess that's fine. That stuff happens. Most of us can respect that, but why not at least give some kind of update? And the fact that we got no trailer, no other touch bases of this game in any Nintendo Direct or anything, very strange. And so we're all kind of ready to see if this game is finally going to be real. Which of course brings me to E3 and the fact that clearly, as is the thesis of this video, I think that maybe next week at Nintendo's Direct will finally be the time to see this game. This feels like the E3 where some of their biggest games and announcements make sense to happen, and Bayonetta 3 is just one of those titles. High profile, third party, exclusive. There's a lot riding on this game. There is a lot of expectations. I think they're going to deliver on those expectations. I absolutely think the game is just going to be fantastic. And I don't know, maybe it's lower on the list of possibilities, but I almost feel like Kamiya coming out and giving us those statements early on in the year about forgetting about expectations and being surprised when it shows up later, I almost feel like that was a little bit of a wink to the fact that they already know the game is meant to show up this year and hopefully at the Direct at E3 next week. And so it just feels like the time. And so call me crazy. Obviously, I could be wrong with any of these, but I feel like we're going to see Bayonetta 3 next week. Now, of course, let's go back to a topic that we constantly revisit here on this channel, and pretty much all of the Nintendo-related channels and personalities are constantly revisiting, and it's The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, another mysterious game that, at the bare minimum, we at least have some sort of substantial cinematic related trailer. Like, the trailer that exists for Bayonetta 3 is solely like a CG teaser that literally has nothing of substance in it. The Breath of the Wild 2 trailer we got at E3 2019, 2 years ago by the way, that does have some substance to it because it shows Link and Zelda and like a dead but resurrected Ganon like doing things and flashes of stuff that insinuates some kind of story. And we've seen the characters running in the game's engine. So it feels like that game is that much more real. And this has been a huge topic of conversation and debate right now about what's happening with that game. Will it release this year or next year or even after that? Will it be at E3? Will it not be at E3? 35th Zelda anniversary year, are they going to do something or not? I mean, that's been the debate. And I'm going to continue to double down on my personal theory. I think the game is coming out this year, and I think we're going to see it at E3 a lot. Now, I of course understand why people feel like that game won't be releasing this year, because it's Zelda, and that's what Zelda games do. They get delayed. They take years upon years upon years to release. Usually Nintendo will touch base with this title several times with us before eventually we get the date and eventually it comes out. The original Breath of the Wild is the perfect example, going way back to when that was Zelda U and revealed at E3 of 2014. And it had several dates. It had a 2015 date, a 2016 date, and a 2017 date, you know? And we didn't even get the title of the game until less than 1 year before it even launched. So, you know, if we look at the Breath of the Wild situation as a template for Breath of the Wild 2, then it's tricky to say. And of course the game could be next year or beyond. My theory could absolutely be wrong. I'm not telling you I'm the guy to listen to, and so go to Vegas and put your money on my prediction. I'm just telling you what I feel, and I think the game very likely has been in development long enough, not to mention it's building off an engine and assets that already exist and have been created, that I feel like this year, 4 years after the last game came out, 4.5 years really if it launched in like, you know, October or November, I think that game could definitely be ready to go this year. And again, in the 35th anniversary year, it makes that much more sense. And yes, even though Skyward Sword HD is already announced for this year, and so that effectively becomes a 35th anniversary game, I still think there's a chance we get that second title with Breath of the Wild 2, which then brings us back to E3, and of course, if this is the first E3 in 2 years, and if the next Zelda title is coming out before the end of this year, that means that next week's E3 Direct and Treehouse just would have to be heavily focused on Breath of the Wild 2. And that's my current running theory. I'm running at about a 60-40 on this, okay, you guys? I'm not saying it's a lock, but I say about 60% chance the game is likely coming out this year and will therefore be heavily featured during their E3 Direct. I mean, if the game is coming out, even if it's coming out, I would say, before next year's E3, plenty of people think it's going to come out like in March of 2022, right? At the end of the fiscal year, match the released month of the original game in 2017. And so even if that's the case, that means the game still would be coming out before E3 next year, which means, again, why wouldn't they take advantage of that game this year at E3, the last E3 before it would release, and focus on it, give us the name and the date, and show it at the Treehouse. It just makes way too much sense. Now, if you believe the game is coming out holiday next year, 2022, 18 months from now, that's a different story. And then, yeah, there'd be less of a chance we would see it heavily focused this year. But I think more than likely the game comes out this year. Maybe it comes out early next year before E3, and in both scenarios, focusing on it at E3 next week makes way too much sense. Part of my theory has to do with the fact that I also think the game would be ready by the time they released it, even if it was in this year. A lot of you may have seen the E3 Nintendo discussion I had with Super Metal Dave a couple of days ago that I posted on the channel, where we talked about all the Nintendo plans and Treehouse stuff for about 45 minutes. Really fun, good thing to do with my buddy Dave. That was a total blast. And he brought up a point that he's not sure if Nintendo would release it this year because Nintendo wouldn't put it out before the game is ready. And I agree with that idea. Of course, Nintendo is not going to release Breath of the Wild 2 until it's finished and it's ready. I agree. But part of my theory when I say the game might come out this year is that I actually think this would be the time that it's ready. It's not that I think they would rush the game out and release it in November 2021 even though it's not finished. No. I think the game would be finished and ready to go. That's my theory, is that the game has been in development long enough that it's ready to go, which would mean that it's hopefully ready to show at E3 next week. And then, of course, what would this E3 predictions video be without Metroid? Of course, I've got to spend some time talking about Metroid, and mostly it is Metroid Prime 4 I'm focusing on, but the fact that Metroid has been in the kind of news and rumor cycle, and there have been, what we are calling leaks, although we don't yet know if they're leaks, but there are leaks and discussions from people who have been in the know in the past saying Metroid is coming, a 2D Metroid is being made. It is Metroid Prime 4 I'm focusing on, and the fact that these other things are in the news right now could lend credence to the fact that Nintendo might want to spend some time on the Metroid franchise at the Direct. Obviously, this subject is near and dear to my heart. You guys know I love Metroid, and I talk about it all the time, and I'm so ready for Metroid Prime 4 to finally become like a real game, as in like we see the game, or Nintendo at least acknowledges it again. And risky as it is to say, and this is why I made this the last topic of these 3 titles, because this is probably the most out there kind of thought or prediction that I'm putting out there. I just feel like 2021 is the time to see Metroid Prime 4. You guys know this. The first video I made in this year was all about why I think 2021 will be the year. And my last video, I discussed the reasons why it might not be at E3, and it could still show up after E3 this year. And that is still true. But I also think it's worth noting why it could make sense. I kind of want to further double down on this idea that the game could show up at the E3 Direct next week. There's so much happening with E3 returning and Nintendo being a part of it, and the 35th anniversary of Metroid as well, you guys. And the fact that Metroid Prime 4, we all know about the restart and the delay, and they took it from the old team and they gave it to Retro Studios. And so the release was obviously delayed by a few years of that game, absolutely. But what we can't forget, it is so important for us to keep this in our brains, you guys. That was 2.5 years ago. The announcement of the delay, just Nintendo's choice to come to us face to face and say, we've restarted development and so it's going to take a while, that was 2.5 years ago. Now, I don't think that game's coming out this year. I don't think anyone expects Metroid Prime 4 to release in 2021. But after 2.5 years working with Retro Studios, and likely longer, because they probably decided to restart it months before they announced it, how can they not have something ready to show now in 2021? I personally believe, without a shadow of a doubt in my brain, they've got finalized complete footage and gameplay of some sections of that game that they could release in a trailer if they wanted to. And so, if they wanted to do that in 2021, like my theory says, of course, E3 becomes the #1 place to do it. This is exactly what I said in my last video, and I want to make sure that more people hear and understand why I'm saying this. And so that's why I'm kind of, I guess you could say, turning this into a bit of a pseudo prediction that, yeah, I'm just going to say I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to be shown at the E3 Direct. Is it very likely? No. Is this a crazy, oddball, out there prediction? Yes. But I'm just going to say it. Like, I think there's a good chance. I'm going to say 50-50 at this point, Here's the thing. I do think Metroid in some fashion will probably be discussed. And so if they're going to talk about a Prime trilogy or a new 2D Metroid game, why wouldn't they also wrap Metroid Prime 4 into that conversation? The level of hype it could generate, even if it was their one more thing, is astronomical. And I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, you guys. All they need, say it with me, is a 30-second teaser. That's all they need. That's got footage, that's got gameplay, that's got a cinematic that shows us Samus. 30 seconds. You think they don't have 30 seconds ready to go after 2.5 years? They do. Now, that doesn't really mean they're going to show it at E3. It's just where I'm going as a fan, because as a fan, I want it to be true. You know, so it's definitely a little bit of a fanboy bias, but I can't help how I feel like in my heart and soul that they've got 30 seconds to show us. And why wouldn't they be willing to show the 30 seconds at this E3 Direct, man? I really think they could make it their one more thing, and that's all it is. And it's going to get us hyped. And then imagine if it's like a 30-second trailer, and at the end, all they show is 2022. That's all they have to do, and we will be so excited. I'm telling you guys, there's a great chance it's going to happen. So I'm putting myself out there, okay? I'm going to say there's a great chance we actually do see Metroid Prime 4 at E3. Obviously, these are the kinds of thoughts and predictions and stuff that get people in trouble. And so, yeah, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with this. Watch all three of these be totally wrong. It is what it is, man. You know, like, I've already discussed the stuff that's like leaks and rumors and that's getting out there publicly behind the scenes. You know, I've talked about that. There's not a lot of new updates as far as a Prime 4, Bayonetta, or Breath of the Wild 2. There's none of that stuff going around out there. These are just three of the biggest titles we know being made for the Switch that I wanted to talk about as far as showing up at E3. And I think there is varying levels of chances that all three may show up during their Direct, you know, which again is only 8 days from now. It's very, very crazy. And it's very exciting. And you know, you do this because, again, most people won't believe these predictions, and so if they end up being right, it's going to feel that much more exciting that they were right, and it's going to catch us all off guard, and it's going to be great. This is a way Nintendo can really capture us at E3 and have one of their best E3 Directs they've ever had. So until the next big E3 stories or rumors come out, this is what there is to talk about. This is my thought on these three games: Bayonetta 3, Breath of the Wild 2, Metroid Prime 4. Bring it on. I think we're very kind of sort of likely going to see them at E3 next week. So that's what I have to say about that. What do you guys think about the theories, the predictions, my thoughts? What are your own thoughts on these games? Will we see them? Will we not? Whatever you think, talk about it below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.